Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Aliana Kernodle. According to international test results, student academic performance in the United States has dropped dramatically since 2019, the last assessment, and the year before government and school leaders sent children to learn at home during the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brennan Clary. Brennan, let's just start with the basic. What is this test?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's one that I think a lot of people probably haven't heard about, and it comes around every several years. So it's not like this is released every year, and it's a very well-known metric, but I think it is a good metric to look at, performance over time. So it's called the Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. And so that is the name of it. And so it's for short, it's just called TIMSS or TIMSS. And basically, it's what it sounds like. It's an international assessment that monitors student achievement in math and science. And it's given to currently over 70 countries. And it's been going since 1995. So that's it's almost 3 decades of looking at how are students doing in these different countries. And so, some, I think, countries have joined it more recently than that, but the United States has been taking this and has been administering it to students since 1995. So there is this data that we have that shows, it kind of shows the trends of academic achievement according to tests, right? So that's the other thing too to point out is that this is a standardized test, and that kind of has its own sort of, there are a lot of critics of it who say, it doesn't really show like this is what students are learning. And then on the other side, it's like, well, this is the metric that we have. So we need to kind of use that and think about this in terms of, learning loss. So we can rely on these tests. Those advocates would argue we can rely on these tests for kind of a metric of how students are doing.
And what students are tested on this test? Is it every grade level or just certain ones?
Yeah, just certain ones. So there's in this one, in the TIMSS, it's science and math. And so you had 4th grade students taking the science and 4th grade students taking math. And then you have 8th grade students taking science and math. And so you have basically 4 different metrics there, in both grades taking both of those subjects. So that's really the only data that we have from that one. And there is another test that does measure reading, but that was not included in these results.
So what do we see in these latest results?
Yeah, essentially, overall, we saw that most students had decreased performance. And so for the 49 countries with comparable 4th grade data in 2019, 14 showed an increase in average mathematics achievement in 2023. 13 had a decrease, and 22 had no change. The organization who runs the test, the IEA, said in a press release last week. And those trends were similar in science, where 15 showed an increase in achievement, 13 showed a decrease, and about 21 had no change. And then that organization, the one that runs the assessment, the TIMSS assessment, they said that 8th grade students, only several countries saw improvements there. So broadly speaking, 34 countries with, the comparable 8th grade data in 2019, only 3 showed an increase in average math achievement, and 14 showed a decrease, and 17 had no change. And that was similar in science. Only 3 countries had an increase in average achievement. 15 had indicated a decrease, and 16 had no change. So broadly, these countries had the ones that were also tested in 2019. Most of them, especially in 8th grade, 15 of them went downward, 16 had no change, and only 3 of them got better. So we did see a lot of academic declines according to this test nationwide, specifically the United States. And that was the main focus for Chalkboard News, because we focus on taxpayer news, and specifically we're focused on outcomes for taxpayer money, is that we saw declines, rapidly, greatly declined since 2019, since the start of the pandemic. So in the 2023 assessment, 4th graders had an average math achievement score of 517. That's down from 541 in 2011 and 518 in 1995. And so those were the previous low scores. So in 2019, the average score for math was 535. So there was an 18-point drop in the 4 years spanning the pandemic, right? So like these 4th grade students have just seen kind of a crushing drop. In 8th grade, on the math assessment, that was a 27-point fall from 2019 to 2023. So in 2019, they had a score of 515 on average. And then in 2023, there was 488. So again, these are pretty radical drops year over year. And a lot of these were the lowest. Some of the scores for the average American student were the lowest ever recorded. So like in the lowest score for 8th grade math students was 492 the first year that it was taken. And we had been on an upward trajectory until COVID-19, where you had seen maybe a slight decline in 2019 over 2015, but a lot of them just dropped precipitously and, had not, come back. So in a lot of these cases, it was sometimes the lowest score that students had ever received from the U.S.
So what is the U.S. trying to do to address these issues?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are aware of how much money the federal government authorized to spend on schools for the recovery of students who were told to stay home during COVID and move school online. So we've seen billions of dollars, routed toward educational recovery. And that hasn't seemed to play out in a big way so far. And a lot of the national test scores, a lot of these international test scores that show the national performance, they've not yet indicated that there's been a rebound in educational performance. So that's kind of the tough part, is when you're looking at all of these different test scores that come in, there's not really a lot of light. I mean, still we're finding, more and more just that, like, how far students are still behind, and that, how much work there is to be done. It's very interesting to know that Secretary Miguel Cardona, who has, weighed in on some of these international test scores before, hadn't said anything yet. The other thing too I wanted to bring up is that this is an international test score. Like, this is a standardized assessment. This is, a picture of one aspect, right? This is a standardized test. Some people say, like, maybe we stopped teaching toward the test since 2019. A lot can change. But at the same time, like, that's kind of those are the metrics that we have, right? And so we're relying on those from a state level, and this international level to try to figure out, like, how far we've come. And so far, there's not really been a lot of good indicators, especially on a national level, that students are gaining that, academic achievement back that they lost during the pandemic. And unfortunately, we have students who were sort of, said, hey, we can't get you the same kind of education that we are supposed to be able to do, but, like, there's a pandemic going on, so you graduate and you're out there. And I've read about that too, and a scholar that I spoke with called that a COVID credential, right? So, and I think that's kind of the hard part about this, is that we've seen those declines, and we haven't seen anything come back yet.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.